Hello and welcome to School Psychology with Dominique. In this video, I'm going to be teaching you about how to write a legally defensible report. Now, this is something that can change on a daily basis. The information that is believed to be important today may need to be updated as we go because whenever a settlement happens or a lawsuit happens and courts decide certain things or your district decides certain things when they're sitting in a settlement meeting, they may decide that, oh wow, in that report they were missing this and that's why we had to present the information in this way. Where then they're going to tell you, okay, you guys, I need you to start doing this in your reports. So just be aware that you just need to be able to change as the process changes. But overall, the best way to make sure that you are as prepared as possible if you're sitting in one of those meetings is to make sure you have a really strong report. Now, when you're writing a report, the first thing that you need to consider is the referral question. What was the cause of concern? You need to make sure that you are always evaluating in any area of concern. And that could be something that comes up during your evaluation. So you may be testing a child and no one had concerns regarding fine motor skills, or they didn't express their concerns regarding fine motor skills, but you do an assessment with them or you're observing them and you notice like, oh, I think that the occupational therapist needs to be tagged in on this assessment. And that's okay because you can always send out another consent form to the parent and request that additional assessment is going to be conducted. And then that way you're making sure that you are addressing any and all areas of concern. The next part of the evaluation that you want to make sure is really strong and healthy is the background report. So you want to make sure the background history. So you want to make sure that you're including anything and everything that could potentially be impacting the student's education or that could be just supporting their education. So you want to write like anything about family that you know about. So who do they live with? What is that situation like? Do the family have a history of disabilities? Then there's going to be a health and development section. Typically the nurses will do a vision and hearing screening. And then you're going to include anything that has to do with a private evaluation. And if they were assessed by a private person, you want to make sure that you get consent from the parent to be able to consult with that person and understand what it was that they saw and maybe collaborate on some things and just get an idea and do an interview with them and include that in the report. If you're not able to reach them, as happens often, then you just want to make sure that you're documenting all the attempts that you made to get in contact with that individual. And you want to make sure there's at least 3 in there. Another part of the background section that's really important is the academic review. So you want to know, did they have any tardies and how often? And what was their school history like? Did they go to multiple schools? Did they just go to the one school? And you want to include their grades, but you also want to make sure that you're not just including grades, you're also looking at that report card for the comment section. That can be really important as well. They can write that their grades are okay, but their concerns are all about their behaviors and their attention, and that's all in the comment section. So you want to make sure you're including that too. Or vice versa, all the teachers are saying that the child behaves really well and is able to make friends and they have no concerns about any of those things, but parent brought to you attention concerns. So those comments are very valuable as well. So another thing that you want to add to the evaluation are observations. You wanted to have a testing observation in there. How did the student behave when they were with you during testing? Were they social? Did they make eye contact? Did they engage in reciprocal conversations? Were they constantly fidgety? Were they able to keep their bodies still? All these things, the questions go on, and you want to make sure that you're including that in your testing observation. You also want to observe them in the classroom, and best practice is to observe them during the time of which the academic area of concern is being conducted. So for example, if the concern was writing, you don't want to go in during math you can go in there for an additional observation, but you definitely want to make sure at least one of your observations is during writing. And you also want to have an unstructured observation. So that could be recess or in the classroom if they're having free choice time and they're able to engage with each other, that would be okay too. because you want to identify like how they are engaging with others and how they're presenting when they are in a social environment. And even though social skills may not be a concern, it's still a good idea to have that in there just in case. And the next area that you want to make sure that you have are the parent and teacher and student interviews. So long as the student is capable, you want to do an interview with the student as well. You want to ask them, what are your favorite things to do? What's easy for you? What's hard for you? Different questions like that. I always like to ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I have questions in which I ask them, if you had 3 wishes, what would you wish for? If you had 1 wish for your family, what would you wish for? If you had 1 wish for yourself at school, what would you wish for? And I always find that if anything, it really helps you kind of understand what their priorities are. And the parents really like that as well. So it helps you build more of that rapport with the parent when you're presenting that information. And then when you're interviewing the parent, you want to make sure that you are asking them any and every question possible to understand any and every possible concern that they may have and what their goals are for their child. And the same thing for the teacher. You want to make sure that you get what are their reading levels, how are they doing academically in all areas. You want to break that down socially, behaviorally, all of that stuff. So the best way that I find that I can get that information is through a questionnaire. And then if I have additional follow-up questions, I will follow up with the teacher or the parent with an interview. The next section of the report should be your assessments. So you want to make sure that you are not only just describing the assessment, but you are relating it back to the previous academics that were assessments that were conducted. So if an assessment was conducted by an outside provider or by a previous school district or anything like that, you want to include all of those test scores. And in the background section, that's what I was forgetting that I could not remember in the moment. In the background section, it's very important that you review those prior evaluations. And while you're reviewing it, include what was the initial concern, what was the result of that evaluation. You don't just want scores, you want that information as well. That would make it a stronger, legally defensible report when you're including all of that information. And then when you're writing your assessment pieces, you want to make sure that you are connecting it to just comparing and contrasting to those prior assessments. And again, that will make it a legally defensible report because now you're saying like, oh, look, we all saw the same thing, or this is different and this is why it potentially could have been different. And write that explanation in. And then another thing to make sure that you're including is when you have rating scales from the parent and from the teacher or from whoever else, you want to make sure that you include examples of what it was that they documented, especially if it relates to the referral question. So if they're talking about attention and the parent's rating scale is super elevated, you're going to write examples of what they wrote those questions that were related to attention. And then let's say the teacher's rating scale is not elevated. Well, in the meeting, there's going to be a question about, well, what happened there, right? So if you have those examples in the report, then you're ready to present on them and you're ready to present them as data to the parent. Now, the next section you want to make sure you include is a summary section. And I know like for many of us, we include summaries within our own section, and then you have the academic section and then the speech section and all of that stuff. But I like to, at the very end of our reports, all of our reports together, include a summary of each of our sections. So I would write like cognitive, processing, social emotional, those will all be my summaries. And then academic, I'd have the special education teacher's summary, and then speech pathologist, etc. And so that's because there are some people like lawyers who like to look at the beginning and the end of the report and then maybe look in between as they go through the process. But you want to be able to have an opportunity, if there is a person who's looking at it as a quick snapshot, then it's clean and it's ready to go and it's easy to find. After the summary section, it's super important that this next section is done as well as possible. It is the eligibility section. In this section, you want to make sure that you are, again, addressing the referral question. So if they were concerned about academics, then you must rule in or out specific learning disability. And if you're considering other health impairment for ADHD or other health concerns, then you want to make sure you're ruling that in or out. And if it's an initial, I also like to rule out intellectual disability. This is the first time they're getting a cognitive evaluation by us. And so I will give an adaptive rating scale, and I will look into cognitive abilities, and I will rule out in or out intellectual disability. We may think that we might know what their IQ score is, but without the data, we don't know for sure. And without saying that you've addressed it and that you've ruled it out, then it doesn't get included in the data. So you want to make sure that you are spelling it out. You are spelling out all areas of eligibility that you potentially considered. You want to consider as many eligibilities as possible while you're doing the assessment, because something might come up later. You might think that you're doing a preschool assessment and the parent was only concerned about speech and behavior. And at the end of the report, it says speech and language disorder, qualified or not qualified, right? Met eligibility or not. But what happened to the behavior? What eligibility category was considered for behavior? Why did the rest of the team get involved? You want to make sure you address that in that section, because even though at that meeting, you might say that the child only meets speech eligibility or doesn't, and the parents seem to be fine with that, and you're good. Well, the parent might come back a year or two later and be like, well, now I have an autism diagnosis, so I would like an assessment. You may have already had all the data in that initial report to address whether or not that child met eligibility at that time for autism, but without specifically stating that, the team has to do another evaluation because you never formally looked into autism. So you just want to make sure that this section is really clean and you're explaining why the child does or does not meet eligibility. You're giving examples in those eligibility sections and making it clear as to why they did or did not meet eligibility at that time. And now the last section of the report, also important, is the recommendation section. So in this section, we don't want to list out every intervention or accommodation that we can think of. We want to make sure it is child-centered. So what does this child specifically need to be successful in the classroom, or what can they benefit from, or what did you see work that should probably continue as well, or what are your recommendations moving forward? Now you've gotten to know the student really well. Maybe you have a new recommendation for the team. So you want to include that, and you want to make it as clear as possible for anyone who's looking at that report moving forward, whether or not they qualify or don't qualify. If they don't qualify, then there shouldn't be that many recommendations in there, because a student in a general education setting should not need a long list of interventions. They can need some interventions, of course, but not a long list. And that makes me wonder, okay, well, do they need more than just these services? So you want to make sure that you're really considering the child when you're completing that section. And overall, throughout the report, you want to be child-centered. You want to see the child as a whole. You might have one piece of data that doesn't match everything else. You need to be able to explain that. You need to be able to come to the table and be like, okay, I understand that this looks like this, but knowing X, Y, Z, B, D, E, and F of the child, I can now tell you that I feel certain that it is this, So you want to make sure that all of your data can be put together and make sense and tell the whole of the child. And so that when you're in those meetings, if you do end up being in a meeting and a lawyer is present or an advocate is present, you have all the data you need to be able to state why you and the team feel like the child does or doesn't qualify, and why they do or don't qualify for certain eligibility categories. This will help to make that process go by better. It'll make the lawyers that you work with happy. It'll make your team happy, and hopefully it'll make the parents happy as well, knowing that you did your best in making sure that you understood their child and wanted the best for their child. I hope this video was helpful. Please subscribe to my page, like this video, and write a comment. Let me know what you guys want to learn about next. All right, see you later. Bye.